I couldn't disagree with Mike Tomasky more. No, actually, I mean, I've been really, I think the 100 days is a little bit, can be a little bit of a dangerous myth, and rooted in the way we tell the story of FDR, and rooted in the idea that change is so difficult to achieve in American politics that if you don't sort of jam it through in a intense, furious, compressed time period, you'll never get anything done. Which there's some evidence for that. I mean, I worked on the Hill for a long time, and I've always thought I worked on the Hill for, I guess, 6.5 years, and I've always thought basically there was a total in there of maybe 11 months where like stuff was actually happening, like the beginning of the beginning of the Clinton, just the period up to the passage of the budget, fairly compressed periods. But I think part of Obama's political project is actually to open up that space and kind of make every day count, to put it in a sort of banal way, in almost the same way that he did with delegates in the primary. I mean, the conventional wisdom about 100 days is sort of the same as the conventional wisdom about you got to win New Hampshire and Iowa, and then you just blast through with momentum, and not losing New Hampshire and then saying, okay, it's really every delegate counts. It's not like these delegates count and the others are just will just fall in line automatically. Is almost how I feel like Obama's dealing with both the days of the presidency and the nation as citizens, as in a sense where every piece of it has to be cultivated. I do want to say, I think we should have, just to pull back and have a little perspective for a second, it is kind of a miracle that this is happening at all. I mean, we really have to appreciate that for 8 years we had, really what, I guess it's Habermas's term, a legitimation crisis of government. We had an electoral crisis at the beginning of the Bush administration, constitutional, kind of almost suppressed constitutional crises throughout. A kind of a war of a type that is sort of unimaginable in our history, and the degree to which it was not just something we stumbled into like Vietnam, but something that was really systematically built on dishonesty and an invasion of attacks on civil liberties that we haven't seen since probably the Red Scare, and as well as torture. It's kind of unbelievable that you could come through all that, and the institutions are intact, and here we are kind of undoing these things one by one, as well as the economic mess, doing our best to kind of democratically, walk these crises back without without the real constitutional crisis, without the meltdown that it was easy to see coming. It's always I was mystified by political scientists. If you know a lot of political scientists, they all have this sort of cheerful personality. I always wonder. I've asked them. I've sort of made a project of occasionally asking political scientists, why do you always have this, like Tom Mann at the Brookings Institution, they all have this kind of upbeat attitude. And it's because there is this built-in deep faith in our political institutions that was sorely tested, and yet they were just, to some extent, they were really justified. I think that Mike is right to put the Obama political project is the essence of it, and it's a political project that is far broader than I think, with all respect to Mike's article, which was wonderful. It's bigger than Mike's article. It's bigger than anything that I ever thought of in terms of what reshaping the political process is. And it's things like, to me, it's really symbolized by the story in the paper. There's a little spin to this, but the story about the decision about releasing the torture memos. And the president saying, I want a debate, I want the two sides on this, to each, name your person, make the best case. They did it. And then in front of them, with everybody in the room, he dictates the statement about the decision he makes, as opposed to the Bush method where the decision is some sort of black box thing. It's an awareness that every action is more deeply legitimated by everybody being in the room, whether it's, whether it's a room of 12 people, as in that case, or the more broader engagement that I think they're really trying to undertake online and in various other forms. And I think it's I think it's led to, I think the political project has led to what we were talking about before, the collapse of the Republican right, which is to say that it's not just something that happened, it's something that happened because of the way President Obama conducted himself, because of the nature of his political project in a fascinating way. I mean, I was always a huge advocate for the Obama cross-partisan rhetoric and so forth. I wrote a piece about it fairly early in the campaign called "The Theory of Change" and what I thought Obama's theory of how you do politics was. And they still do it on like openleft.org. Occasionally they'll be like this, here's another reason why Mark Schmitt was wrong. Because the response, people read it as, I naively believed that Republicans would kind of come along and cooperate, and it would be just like back in the old days with Senator Chafee and Senator Dernberger and all that, which, I'm old enough to get nostalgic about, but not naive enough to really believe that that's the Republican Party we have. I didn't believe that. But the counter to me, the counter argument was, because the Republican Party is just this, it's just going to put up this intransigent opposition, you got to come at them hard. You got to fight them with everything you've got. You have to bring the fight to them. You can't do it in this other way. And I think that was partly where, obviously, that was John Edwards' response to Obama. And I think the fact that, we don't know what would have happened if it was that, but if it was that kind of approach. But the fact of coming into Washington and treating the Republican Party like it should be expected to be a governing part, like it should be expected to have ideas and introduce them into the process and have them weighed out in a democratic fashion, is incredibly disarming to the modern Republican Party, which was organized only for, purely for opposition. So the scary thing, in many ways, the scary thing about the Republican right is that it is so much better at being an opposition party than at being a governing party. And in many ways, it governed as if it were an opposition party, kind of taking off all the restraints, but kind of invited in, it's really crippled in extraordinary ways that I don't think it quite would be if you kind of went straight at it. At the same time, what you have here, just from that starting point of that it's miraculous that we're here at all and kind of undoing the damage of the last 8 years. There is an alternative 100 days, which is still governed by the timidity that infected a lot of the Democratic Party, really, really fed by the media, and that you still get of, we really are, it's still sort of a center-right nation, and more people call themselves conservatives than liberals, and all that stuff, which is just, actually not quite true anymore. There's just an enormous amount of freedom of room to maneuver that Obama understood that he had, more than I think a hypothetical other Democratic president might have had, partly because his political career wasn't so deeply rooted in that conservative era of the 80s and 90s. And so I think that's been and to the extent that he's had difficulties in the 100 days, it's been from Democrats whose normal political mode is to assume, well, it's still a center-right nation, we better be pretty careful about all this stuff. And there could be, assuming that there's a backlash that we don't quite see happening, is probably the best way to explain the caution of an Evan Bayh, for example, which I think as the right continues to fade, the innate cautiousness of Democrats probably fades with it, although I think it'll take a little time. That said, I think the political project was number one and is extraordinary in its scope and potential to change the country. The project that I don't think Obama was about was the economic project. Changing the nature of American capitalism, changing the culture of American capitalism. and understanding that with the same breadth of that he did the political project. I mean, which is, the political project, the genius is understanding that it's not just campaign finance reform and lobbying reform, that it's really about the culture, expectations, doing things in public, treating people as citizens, as Mike says. It's that whole range of initiatives. There, at the same token, I mean, the economic project is not just about, how you treat people's bonuses on Wall Street. I mean, it's really about the culture of capitalism that got us where we are, and what government's relationship is to capitalism, and how are you going to change that. There's a sense that they haven't quite got their hands around that yet, and I don't know. Frankly, the reason I cut him slack on it is because I don't know that anybody else has. I don't share I'm sort of astonished by the certainty with which a Paul Krugman will say, unless you're nationalizing the banks, he might be right, but the certainty is sort of shocking to me. And there's a kind, hopefully the political project opens up the space to work out the economic project with healthcare actually at the heart of it as a thing, and in a way that brings in the outside group. I mean, it's a very different time, and I will stop in a second. What's fascinating to me about this, comparing this administration to the early days of the Clinton administration when I worked on the Hill, is in the Clinton years, either you were in or you were not, or you were nobody. This is the relationship to the external progressive infrastructure is very different here, whether it's NDN, our magazines, New America Foundation thing, the set of things that have been built to make this thing work that they really relate to. And to do the economic project right, you really have to, make maximum use of all this extraordinary capacity that's been built out here. And that's, I think, where we aren't quite yet, but almost.